that there are two kinds of philosophers. There are first those philosophers who stand in a basically Socratic or critical role in relation to prevailing modes of thought. And there are those philosophers who stand in a kind of bandwagon or supportive or applauding relationship to prevailing modes of thought. Professor Alburey Castell is very emphatically a philosopher of the former kind. He has, through a long career, identified with unfailing accuracy the various Achilles heels of the intellectual status quo, and has lifted these to the forefront of his own thinking and of philosophical discussion generally. Professor Castell began his career as a young teacher of philosophy at the University of Minnesota. He continued as a middle-aged professor of philosophy and chairman of the Department of Philosophy at the University of Oregon. And he comes to us today as a kind of elder statesman among American philosophers to speak to us on the very important and arresting theme or question, is science value-free or value-bound? Professor Castell.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've just borrowed a wristwatch, so I'm on borrowed time. It slides down. Now, I've got a substantial problem I want to put before you today. The statement of the question you've just heard, is science value-free or is it value-bound? I think that's about as difficult and diagnostic a question as you can ask yourself in philosophy today. And I want to take the time that's been allotted to me not to answer this question, except toward the very end. I'll tip my own hand so you'll know where I stand. Not so much to answer this question as to point out to you the considerations that you're going to have to take into account if you propose to answer it, or even if you propose to take it seriously. Well, that's what I have in mind to try to do. Here we go. The question, is science value-free or value-bound, is a large and difficult question. Dealing with it, or trying to deal with it, is like raising a flagpole when there's nothing sufficiently fixed against which you can anchor the pole while you try to push it upright. I therefore make no apology for drawing your attention to considerations which are only indirectly related to the question, is science value-free or value-bound? There are some questions, and I think this is one of them, which do not lend themselves to immediate answers. As the French say, if you back up a bit, you make a better jump. I propose to begin by distinguishing between hard sciences and soft sciences. Astronomy, physics, chemistry, physiology are examples of hard sciences. In contrast to anthropology, psychology, sociology, economics, political science, as soft sciences. This distinction between hard science and soft science is not intended as a way of baiting practitioners of the soft sciences. It's not intended as suggesting that soft sciences are hard sciences on the make. Nor is it intended to suggest that a hard science is, in some sense, harder to work at than a soft science. The behavior of a scientist, no matter how, in quotes, hard his science. For example, an astronomer when he's astronomizing. I say the behavior of a scientist has certain characteristic traits. These traits never mark the behavior of the objects which he studies. The behavior of an astronomer when he's astronomizing differs in respect to these traits from the behavior of the solar system or the behavior of the planets that make up the solar system. Now, my first relevant question is, what are some of these differentiating traits? What can we say about astronomizing, which we would hesitate to say about the behavior of the solar system or the behavior of the planets that make up the solar system? Well, we can say that astronomizing is fallible. In astronomizing, error can occur. Where behavior aims at getting to know, as astronomizing does, where behavior aims at getting to know and can fail, it is fallible. Now, this trait does not mark the behavior of the planets or the solar system. Their behavior is in no sense fallible. What are they trying to do and failing at? Nothing, so far as I know. Astronomizing is purposive. There's an intended outcome, namely, getting to know. The astronomer's behavior is intentional. To use an older term, his behavior is teleological. That is to say, directed at a specifiable outcome. You cannot talk this way about the behavior of the planets. Not since astronomy replaced astrology has it been intellectually respectable to construe planetary behavior as purposive, intentional, teleological. Astronomizing is critical. That is, it's guided by reference to criteria. Behavior aimed at getting to know must be regulated by reference to certain criteria. Otherwise, the outcome will be continued ignorance or error. These criteria, if adhered to judiciously, make the behavior scientific. Planetary behavior is in no sense critical. Astronomizing is experimental. The astronomer knows what he wants, but he does not know how exactly to get it. So he experiments, a mode of behavior which is appropriate to fallibility and partial ignorance. Planetary behavior is in no sense experimental. Astronomizing is corrigible. That is to say, error can be detected and revision instituted. Corrigible here is a stronger word than changeable or alterable. Unless the astronomer's behavior has manifested his fallibility, the question of corrigibility does not arise. Planetary behavior is in no sense corrigible. Astronomizing is reasoned or reasoned out. If you cut in at any point and ask, why this step? Or why that conclusion? You get a reason. The astronomer has a reason for what he does. A reason is not the same as a cause. Planetary behavior is in no sense reasoned out. Astronomizing is judgmental, therefore verifiable or falsifiable. As it goes along, a judgment is formulated, and this judgment, when expressed as a proposition, as an hypothesis, is verifiable or falsifiable. Planetary behavior is in no sense judgmental, and is therefore neither verifiable nor falsifiable. Astronomizing has certain detectable presuppositions. These are present in any attempt at getting to know. They are not to be confused with either hypotheses or facts. To be unaware of them is to be, with reference to your scientific behavior, naive. To be aware of them is to grasp more clearly the character of the behavior in which they are operative, your practice as a scientist. Planetary behavior does not have any presuppositions. Nothing which planets do requires them to presuppose anything. Astronomizing is, or may be, response to a challenge. This is more than response to a stimulus. Response to a stimulus, it is automatic, whereas response to a challenge is deliberate and critical. Planetary behavior might possibly be construed as response to a stimulus, although I think that's pretty far out. But it would be speaking in sheer metaphor to say of the behavior of planets that it is response to a challenge. Astronomizing is the locus of alternatives, between or among which a choice is made. The alternative possibilities, or the possible alternatives, might be hypotheses, or methods, or data. Wherever this alternativity exists, a choice is called for. I was confronted with certain alternatives, the astronomer might say, between or among which I had to choose. Planetary behavior in no sense involves any choosing between alternatives. As a consequence of this alternativity, the behavior called astronomizing is responsible. The astronomer must be able to answer for, respond for, what goes on at the point of choice. Astronomical thinking is responsible thinking. To say that it was irresponsible would be damaging criticism. Now, planetary behavior is not in this sense responsible behavior. The distinction between actual and ideal applies to the behavior called astronomizing. Suppose an erroneous hypothesis has taken shape. It is an actual hypothesis, and it is actually there. But ideally, it should not be there. Some other hypothesis is called for. Some other hypothesis ought to be there, where ought means required by the ideal which the actual has violated. Now, nothing in planetary behavior corresponds at all to this distinction. And lastly, by way of this introductory listing of defining traits, The astronomer's behavior is meaningful. It could be studied by semantics. It would not do to say that his behavior was meaningless. That would bankrupt him professionally. However, planetary behavior is not, in the same sense, meaningful. The behavior of planets would not be studied by semantics. Now, these traits and others like them mark the behavior of an astronomer: fallible, purposive, critical, experimental, reasoned out, and so on through that list. That list isn't exhaustive, but that list is representative. And the point is, anything more that you say about astronomizing and about that list must be compatible with that list. You must not say anything about astronomizing which would be incompatible with the fact that astronomizing is fallible, purposive, critical, experimental, reasoned out, and so on. Now, astronomizing is not the only behavior marked by those traits. The behaviors of the physicist, the chemist, the physiologist, the mathematician, all exhibit the same traits. I propose to refer to all such behavior exhibiting that paradigm of traits. I propose to refer to all such behavior as activity. Thus, astronomizing is an activity. And so also is the behavior of the physicist, the physiologist, the mathematician, the chemist, and so on. To generalize the point, you can say that the behavior of practitioners of the hard sciences is activity. Now, in contrast to activity stands behavior which exhibits none of the traits on my list. I propose to refer to all such behavior as process. Thus, process behavior, in contrast to activity behavior, is not fallible, not purposive, not critical, not experimental, not reasoned out, and so on through that litany. None of these or similar traits marks any process, anywhere, at any time. The behaviors of the planets and the solar system are examples of process, not activity. You can say the same for the subject matters of any of the hard sciences. The behaviors studied by physics or chemistry or physiology are all process behavior. No hard scientist ever asks of the behavior which he studies whether it is fallible, whether it is purposive, whether it is critical, whether it is experimental, whether it is reasoned out. Every hard science has for its subject matter a process or a set of processes. No hard science ever has for its subject matter an activity or a set of activities. Indeed, you can say that a hard science is one, the practice of which is activity, the subject matter of which is process. Now, still talking about the hard sciences. Are such sciences value-free? And what's that a way of asking? The statement that hard sciences are value-free is a genuinely obscure statement. Take astronomy as an example. In what sense is astronomy value-free? Anything we can pin down here will hold for the other hard sciences. For example, you can say that astronomy is value-free in the sense that the astronomer need not value planets as a condition for studying them. If the astronomer is indifferent to planets, or even if he despises planets, he can nonetheless still study them scientifically. Astronomy is value-free in the sense that nothing which the astronomer discovers need be a reason for valuing planets. If the more he gets to know about planets, the more he's indifferent to them or even despises them, he can nonetheless continue to study them scientifically. Astronomizing is value-free in the sense that he need not value the use to which his findings are put, nor value whether they're put to any use. His findings may be useless or unused or abused or misused. He can nonetheless still study planets scientifically. Astronomizing is value-free in the sense that, so far as we know, the planets don't value anything, not even the sun. The planets don't value themselves, they don't value the astronomer, and they don't value the astronomy he produces about them. This fact need make no difference to the astronomer. Their valuing him or not valuing him is not a condition for him studying them scientifically. Astronomizing is value-free in the sense that the astronomer is under no obligation to leave any aspect of their behavior uninvestigated. There's nothing about them which had better remain unknown. Astronomizing is value-free in the sense that his getting to know about them does not make them any better or worse than they were before he did so. To speak perhaps in metaphor, his activity does not bestow any value on them or take any away from them. Now, I've mentioned 6 points so far. Ways in which it makes sense to say that astronomy and any other hard science is value-free. There remains a point about which I'm not sure. Let me put it as a question. Is astronomy value-free in the sense that it makes no difference whether the astronomer or anyone else values the astronomical knowledge which he produces? If he and everyone else are indifferent to such knowledge, value it neither for itself nor for its uses, even despise it, can he nonetheless still push ahead with his investigations? The question is not whether he would do so, nor be well advised to do so. The question is whether he could do so. My present inclination is to say that he could do so. Astronomical knowledge is a part of the truth about the world. Is it necessary that a person value that truth as a condition for pursuing it? If there is no such necessity, and at the moment I don't see any, then in this sense also, astronomy and the other hard sciences are value-free. There are then many senses in which astronomy and the other hard sciences are value-free. My list, once again, is not exhaustive. but it is representative. And it does sharpen the question whether there's any sense in which astronomy and the other hard sciences are not value-free. Any sense, that is, in which they are value-bound. Are there any things about which it can be said, if you don't value these, or don't behave as a person would who did value these, then you cannot produce any hard science? If there are, then the activity called sciencing is value-bound. The hard sciences, it could then be said, are value-bound or value-structured activities directed at finding out about processes which are radically value-free. Now, the stakes are high at this point, and the going isn't easy. Can we extend our account of scientific activity along lines which would be relevant to the question, are the hard sciences in any way value-bound? Now, if you isolated an example of the activity which scientists typically perform, what would you have? Where would it begin? How would it proceed? Where would it reach a temporary closure? What would the itinerary be? It would, in every case, begin with what the scientist already knows. If he knows nothing at all, then there's no way in which he can get to know anything at all. In this sense, sciencing consists in a person adding to what he already knows. A second step is to diagnose his relevant ignorance. His ignorance is wide and deep. He must use what he already knows to delimit the area of ignorance upon which he will work. No person beginning a particular scientific investigation proposes to liquidate all of his ignorance by means of this particular investigation. A third step is to formulate a question clearly expressing that ignorance. This step is important. If the question is misformulated, if it's vague, obscure, ambiguous, misleading, too general, too particular, not precisely relevant. I say, if the question is misformulated, then he's not clear what, among all the things he does not know, it is his present intention to find out. A fourth step is to propose a thesis which, if true, would be an answer. There would be no point in proposing a thesis which, if true, would not be an answer, and relatively little point in proposing a thesis already suspected to be false. The point is, in the steps you take in the scientific itinerary, you're not footloose and fancy-free. If you're no respecter of limitations, the outcome will be continued ignorance or error. Having proposed a thesis, it remains to discover whether you're entitled to assert it. This is crucial. It's one thing to propose and another thing to assert. When you assert, you assume responsibility. So, at this step in the scientific itinerary, at this step you want to know whether you're entitled to do so, whether there are grounds for doing so. The language which is customary at this point indicates what's going forward. The thesis which you propose, you now entertain as an hypothesis, hypothesis. The language of hospitality here is not misleading. You entertain your thesis as an hypothesis, as an hypothesis, with a view to discovering whether you will invite it to join the ranks of your already warranted assertions. If it passes the test to which you will subject it, you will be warranted in asserting it. You will invite it in. Otherwise, unless you want your mind cluttered up with irresponsible troublemakers, you will not. Having converted your thesis into an hypothesis, a sixth step is to see whether you can verify or validate or prove or substantiate it. There's only one way to do this. You must show that your hypothesis is required by what you already know. The phrase required by is stronger than the phrase compatible with. You do not verify or validate or substantiate or prove an hypothesis by showing that it is compatible with what you already know. The connection must be stronger than that. What you already know must require what you propose to add. In thus establishing your hypothesis, you reason from what you already know. Such reasoning is along either of two lines. One, if my hypothesis is true, it is required by what I already know. Or, if my hypothesis is true, it will be required by what I shall get to know. And then you wait, or go shunt. These are the basic patterns. However, they're supplemented by two other patterns almost as basic. When you are intent upon showing that your hypothesis is the only one required by what you already know. You do this by showing that any alternative hypothesis is incompatible with what you already know. And such reasoning is along either or both of two lines. One, if the alternative hypothesis were true, it would require me to deny what I already know to be true. Or secondly, if the alternative hypothesis were true, it would require me to admit what I already know to be false. It should be noted that in supporting an hypothesis, or in torpedoing a rival hypothesis, you'll work with what you already know, reasoning from it in support of your hypothesis, or against a rival hypothesis. Success in doing this is what makes assertion responsible. Now, these steps, or others like them, constitute the itinerary of scientific thinking. I may have left some out. I may have oversimplified or misrepresented those which I've tried to mention quickly. But my point would be that after corrections were made, my main point would still be in order, namely that hard sciencing is a set of activities and that the component activities are such as I have suggested. If not identical with them, then very similar to them. If you're unable or unwilling to perform the component activities, you're not in the running as a practitioner of the hard sciences. Can we now speak to our question of a few minutes back? That question was this: are there any things about which it can be said, if you don't value these, or don't behave as a person would who did value these, then you cannot produce any hard science? If there are, then the activity called sciencing is value-bound. We could then say that the hard sciences are value-bound or value-structured activities directed at radically value-free processes. No hard scientist, speaking as a hard scientist, is in a position to say, I do not value such intellectual powers as imagination, reason, memory, perception, judgment, and so on. It is a matter of indifference to me whether I possess such powers. I can get along without them in my business. That's a long close quote there. He's in no position to say that. No hard scientist is in a position to say, I do not value such intellectual virtues as clarity, consistency, reasonableness, patience, persistence, rigor, objectivity, tough-mindedness, open-mindedness, humility, honesty, responsibility, courage, curiosity, disinterestedness, and so on far into the night. He can't say it's a matter of indifference to me whether I possess and exercise such virtues. I can get along without them in my business. The answer is no, he can't. No hard scientist is in a position to say, I do not value such things as facts, evidence, relevance, probability, verifiability, simplicity, and so on. He cannot say, it is a matter of indifference to me whether there are such things. I can get along without them in my business. No hard scientist is in a position to say, I do not value such cosmological traits as intelligibility, uniformity, predictability, orderliness, regularity, amenable to mathematical construction, and so on. He can't say, it's a matter of indifference to me whether the cosmos possesses such traits. I can get along without them in my business. The answer is he can't. No hard scientist is in a position to say, I do not value the impersonal process character of so much of the behavior that goes on in the world. He can't say, it's a matter of indifference to me whether the behaviors which I study are personal or impersonal, value-bound or value-free, activity or process, performed by an agent or simply occurring according to a law. He can't say that it's a matter of indifference to me whether my relation to my subject matter, a hard scientist speaking, he can't say it's a matter of indifference to me whether my relation to my subject matter is I, thou, or I, it. He can't say I can get along with either in my business. I come now to two matters about which I'm not sure, namely, truth and ignorance. Suppose a scientist, speaking as a scientist, were to say, I do not value either truth or ignorance. It is a matter of indifference to me whether I possess either. I can get along without them in my business. What would we say to him? His point about truth, of course, is that since rationally increasable probability is all he ever gets, why not be satisfied with that? How would he know it if he got a piece of truth anyway? My point, that's his point. My point about ignorance is that without it, he wouldn't be in business. Does he value his work? If so, had he not better value ignorance? It's a conditio sine qua non for him functioning. Once it disappears, he's out. I say, does he value his work? If so, had he not better value ignorance? His relation to ignorance is comparable to a physician's relation to disease. If there were no ignorance, how could there be any sciencing? Any getting to know? Would he trade in his sciencing for omniscience? These are some of the things which a hard scientist must value if he's going to remain in business. In these matters he cannot play fast and loose. They are essential to the enactment of his purpose, namely, systematic and orderly liquidation of human ignorance concerning processes in the physical world. In respect to these, he's not value-free. He's value-bound. He must value them, or at least he must behave as a person would who did value them. In this respect, a hard scientist differs from his subject matter. For example, a chemist differs from a chemical. In some ways, the behavior of a chemist is value-free. But in other ways, the behavior of a chemist is value-bound. Whereas, so far as we know or believe or assume, the behavior of a chemical is entirely value-free. No chemical values or need value anything for any reason whatsoever. This, in great part, is why chemicals cannot produce chemistry. Now, my time is up, and the soft sciences are still to be heard from or about, but you won't lose anything if I don't tell you about them.